Hey, today I'm talking about 3 iconic horror films from the 70s. And the names of those 3 films are I Spit on Your Grave, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Hills Have Eyes. First up is I Spit on Your Grave. This is a 1978 revenge film, and it's pretty infamous for its incredibly lengthy rape scene. And it definitely deserves its infamy for how incredibly frickin' brutal it is. Because it is a rough watch. Ugh. So this was a very, very interesting movie. I remember just kind of in the middle of the lengthy rape scene thinking to myself, okay, Charlie, how do you feel about this movie? And the answer is, well, obviously I don't like this. No one could like this, what's happening right now. Ugh. But then near the end of the scene, everything finally clicked for me and I got it. I got what this film is all about, and I love it. It's amazing. I'll tell you my interpretation of this film. There's definitely more than one interpretation of this film, but this is definitely not just a simple revenge film. It's so much more than that, no matter how you interpret it. So to explain what I think this film is, I have to break down the premise a bit. So this 30-year-old woman, she's published several short stories in magazines, and now she wants a summer away at a cabin to write her great American novel. And at one point, we hear her writing one of the pages, and it basically breaks down to, it kind of talks about her as just like a strong, independent woman, just a modern day woman who, you know, isn't tied down by a family, is career oriented, but like still has lovers and boyfriends, and is just, you know, can still be overwhelmed by the modern world, but still happy that she has the modern world to live in and stuff like that. And then of course the awful, brutal rape happens, and near the end of it, one of the assailants finds her pages and starts mockingly reading them aloud. And that's when it hit me that she is a metaphor for modern day feminism, and the assailants represent both toxic masculinity and just like misogyny in general. They basically just represent the assault on feminism. Because just like looking at that particular moment, there's so many people who would agree with the awful rapist in their mockery of this woman's strong, independent views of herself. But the filmmakers equate their mockery of her to this incredibly brutal rape. So it's very clear to me what their viewpoint on misogyny is. And toxic masculinity, even though I don't think that was a common phrase back then. So after that moment where it all came together, I loved this film. That's also the turning point in the film. That's when it becomes more of a revenge film. And boy, oh boy, is it a satisfying revenge film with some great brutal kills. I loved too that she used her sexuality as a tool. That's kind of one of my favorite, I don't know if it's quite a trope yet, but it's a storytelling device when a woman can use her sexuality to her favor. One of my favorite examples of it is Swimming Pool. It's one of my favorite movies in general, but it's a great use of sexuality as a weapon. Here is another great use of it as well. I in particular just loved how, so like these 4 dudes did the thing to her, and after recovery, she goes to them one by one and starts hitting on them, being like, oh, what you did before, that was so great. I really want some more of it. And they immediately believe her. And like, it's kind of absurd that they believe her, but it's also incredibly painfully realistic that they believe her. Because in their minds, they don't think that they did anything wrong. When in actuality, it's blatantly obvious that they did something incredibly wrong. But like, that's one of the logical fallacies that happens with a lot of rapists, is they don't think they did the wrong thing. When really, they definitely did, and it was clear that they did. Even if their friends agree with them that they didn't do anything wrong, it doesn't mean that they didn't do anything wrong. So yeah, no, this was a great film. It was an easy really like for me. I caution recommending it though, just because it is a very, very difficult movie to watch. It is incredibly brutal. That is the point of it though. It's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. And this movie could definitely be very, very triggering to people, and I totally understand that. But if you think this is a movie that you can stomach, I definitely recommend it. I definitely think it is a very worthwhile watch with a very important and essentially timeless message. So yeah, it's great. Caution watching it though, but you should watch it if you can. Next up is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is a 1974 film. It's considered one of the first slasher films. The basic premise is this group of 20-somethings drive down to middle of nowhere, Texas, because the cemetery where their grandfather was buried got vandalized, so they're checking it out, and then they also check out the old house that he owned back in the day. And while there, they come across this other family of some really messed up people. And a lot of people die. It's a massacre. This was a really interesting film. It kind of felt like it was almost a student film, especially with just like regards to the dialogue and the acting. I don't know exactly how to describe it because there's a lot of just weird choices that were made. That being said though, this movie nails the unsettling feeling. Like you're really just like, there's like rocks in your shoes, ants in your pants type of thing of just like, something's just not quite right, I just don't like this. And I really appreciated that. They nailed it like just with that opening shot. It's so gross. And then like besides being very unsettling, it's also kind of really pretty. Like there's some really, really good, gorgeous shots. This one was definitely my favorite one. It may be a bit sexualizing because it is, you know, right up her butt, but like, I don't know, the house right there is just, it's looming over her and you know that she's walking into her doom. So it's kind of terrifying, but also beautiful at the same time. It just really, really works. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed this film. It's a quite liked, and I think that's a good place for it. I think it deserves its iconic status. It's definitely not a perfect film, but I can understand why it's inspired so many over the years. I would say if you're a fan of horror films in general, this is definitely a must watch if you haven't already. If you're not really a horror person, this movie's not really gonna sway you over to the dark side in a sense. But if you're curious about it, it's definitely worth a watch. And lastly is The Hills Have Eyes. This is a 1977 Wes Craven film, my second Wes Craven film, my third Wes Craven film. And after watching it, looking at the IMDb, it turns out that this is Wes Craven's homage to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And they do share a number of similarities. I don't think this one works as well though. The basic premise is this family is on their way to California, but they swing by middle of nowhere somewhere to look at silver mines for a really dumb reason. But then they get into a car accident and then a bunch of cannibal mutants attack them. Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I didn't like any of the non-cannibals. It's basically as soon as the dad said the N-word, I was just like, well, you're a piece of shit. All right. Can't wait for you to die. And I don't think that we were actually supposed to think that when he said that. But yeah, I don't know. And I got kind of bored with it a little bit. I still ended up liking this movie. Part of that comes from my bias of my most viewed YouTube video from my other channel is a parody of The Hills Have Eyes. That's also a first aid video that I made in 10th grade health class with some friends. It has over 100,000 views. It's definitely worth a watch if you want to learn how to splint. So I have a soft spot for this movie because of that. Even though I hadn't seen this one or the remake prior to making that short film. But yeah, I don't know. It's still clear that this is early on in Wes Craven's filmography. Like, it's definitely an improvement over The Last House on the Left, but it still feels kind of amateurish. It's not bad though. It's just rough around the edges, I think is the nicest way to put it. I think if you're like a die-hard horror fan, this is definitely a must-watch. It's one of the classics. But if you're not a horror fan, this is an easy miss. You don't need to see this one. It's not that scary, not that weird. It's fine, but it's not what I was hoping for. So, yeah. Alrighty, now for today's rankings. First up, we got I Spit on Your Grave, sitting at number 6 in the really like category, just behind Don't Breathe. And then after that, we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, sitting at number 20 in the quite like section. And then bringing up the rear is The Hills Have Eyes, sitting at number 32 in the liked category. And this is out of a total of 48 old movies so far this year.